I'm so glad you joined us for Biblically Grounded this week. I'm your host, Clayton Van Huss, and I am joined today by a special guest, my dear friend, professor, teacher, a man who taught me many things. We're joined today by Dr. Douglas Petrovich. Dr. Petrovich, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Clayton. It's great to be with you today.
It is great to have you here. Now, people know you from a lot of different places. You are currently at Brooks Bible College, where you are the professor of Old Testament history and exegesis, and that's pretty cool. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm enjoying teaching online. Most of my students are from the St. Louis area. I live in the Houston area, but I've had some really exciting classes and some great students. I've covered all of Old Testament survey in 2 semesters. I'm just finishing now teaching a really exciting course. I've never taught it before. It's called The Life and Psalms of David. So that's been a great joy for me, forced me to hone down some things in relation to the United Monarchy and David's reign. So lots of good has come from it, and hopefully you'll be able to see some of that fruit in the future.
Yeah, hopefully that's very exciting. You do a lot of work with documentary films and even, I think, some narrative films, some work with an animated film coming up. You've, of course, been involved with Is Genesis History, which was my introduction to your work. I saw you and Del Tackett in Chicago talking about, well, the subject we're going to talk about today, finding Babel. We're going to be talking about the Tower of Babel. Where did it take place? When did it take place? All kinds of exciting things. So I'm excited to talk to you about that. But also, you were my Hebrew professor when I was at the Bible seminary, and you taught some of my archaeology classes, some of my different doctrinal classes. So you're a man with a lot going on.
Well, for whatever reason, God made me an interdisciplinarian. I love various fields, and really, Clayton, the more depth that you have in related fields, the more you're able to see the big picture. So I've always been pushed by my professors to expand my horizons, and I've tried to do that professionally, and I've tried to do it with my students as well, as you probably know. And the more you can get a grasp and get your mind around various approaches to things, various fields, the more depth that you'll have in any or every one of them. So I think that's really important to quality learning.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right on that. As Christians, we study the Bible, we study this spiritual book, but there's also a lot of other things that are in the Bible. There's history and things like that that we can find, even science here and there. Even though that's not what the Bible is intended to cover, it does bring those things in, and it gives us some very interesting bits and pieces to look at historically to match things up. And that's what we're going to talk about today, correct?
That is, and I can't wait to talk to you about Babel.
Well, you know what? Let's just go ahead and get into it.
Sure.
I would love to talk to you today about the situation. Can you present the story of Babel for us? I mean, there's varying ideas of what happened, and we all have a Sunday school idea, and that's everybody got off the ark, they lived for a little while, there were some children, then everybody got together to build a tower in a city. Is that what the Bible teaches us, or what are we looking at?
Yeah, and really, Clayton, it's interesting because for me, that was an open question. You know, how many people were there at the site of the events that we read about, with the confusion of the languages and the people being dispersed because of the inability to speak to one another, and the emotional stress must have been literally off the charts. But really, it was through my study and stumbling into I think I'm convinced is the right evidence to be able to pin down the outward movement of people first, and then secondly, the site of Babel itself. In that study, I came to understand, I think, with clarity, how to answer that question. And I think the right answer is that all of the people on the earth were not gathered in one place. And really, there's nothing in the Bible itself that makes us believe this. Nothing in Genesis 10, nothing in Genesis 11 that makes us think that. So it almost certainly was the case that it was some select number of people, and the number grew over time. Probably their numbers grew both from within and from without. So there would have been a population increase by the citizens having their own children, and over time, lots of people coming in. And we know that, well, if I'm right about the site, which we'll talk about later, then it existed over a long period of time. And that allows for even more people to come along. But it's an imposition on the text to suggest that these events require all of the people on the earth to be in one place. So that wasn't the problem. That wasn't the issue. The issue was that they gathered in one place and just grew and grew and grew there when they were under the command of God to disperse and fill the earth, which some number of people didn't do. They didn't like that idea. They liked the idea of being together. And as we know, it ended up being, a tragedy for them. So it comes back to, to more answer your question. Some group of people get together. They say to themselves, let's build a city and a tower with its, and I like to literally translate this, with its top in the sky. So it's a mistake, I believe, to lead your readers to believe the possibility that maybe this is heaven, as if
Yeah.
they're attempting to cause their building, the height of their building, to reach the abode of God. I
Right,
don't
and
think.
I hear that a lot. I hear
Yes.
people make that objection, like, "Oh, they were too smart. They're not going to build a tower where they can climb into heaven." And that's not what the Bible teaches us. It's into the heavens, the sky. And you were my Hebrew professor, and that's something I think that our viewers should understand is that you're a man you're an epigrapher, you're a linguistic expert in Hebrew, biblical Hebrew. And so you can explain to us, and that helps to illuminate what was going on. They weren't trying to climb their way into heaven, but they were putting a tower whose top was in the heavens, in the sky. So
Yeah.
what are they doing with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the Hebrew word there, shemayim, and you probably remember how I talked about this in the Hebrew class.
Yes.
It has three main meanings to it. One is, and it goes back to the Hebrew conception of the world, which
Hmm.
is, and everything around them, which is that the world and the scripture was written from the perspective of a person standing on planet Earth.
Hmm.
So you're out there, you're in nature, you're standing, and so there are things above, things equal to you on your level, and then things below, like the grave, right? So for them, anything above is shemaim, and that word in Hebrew is in dual. It's
Yeah,
not.
it's not pluralistic. My Hebrew professor made sure I understand with that ayim ending that's two. That's not just
Yes.
simply plural.
It's
Why?
not simply plural. It's not singular. It's paired. So there's a pair. And with this word, there are a number of ways I think you can understand the pair. Um, One is, if you're a person standing on planet Earth during the day, you look up and you see a bright blue sky, sky blue. But if you let the clock move about 12 hours or whatever it takes, and all of a sudden it's dark and you're still out there and you're looking up, you don't see any light blue anymore. You see black. It's pitch black. And because of the blocking of the sun, you're now able to see, theoretically at least, infinitely into the cosmos, into the universe. And that's also the Shemayim. So the fact that one word encompasses two concepts there, it's the light blue sky of the day and it's the deep dark black of the night, in representing the universe. You can see the paired combination there. So that's what's going on. But there are three ways that this word is taken. One is for the universe, so the deep dark black of the expanse of the universe. Second is the sky blue daylight that you see, and our word for that is atmosphere. You're looking up into the atmosphere and you're seeing, as a result of the sunlight, you're seeing this light blue color. And of course, there's a lot going on there. scientifically. And then the third option for the meaning of this word is the abode of God. So only one of those is in play when the Hebrew word is used, pretty much typically, if not across the board. And so the question here is, what are we talking about? Well, it's not the abode of God, because God doesn't dwell in the world he created, right? At least not at this time. And secondly, it can't be it can't be the deep dark black expanse of the universe, because how can mankind, apart from spacecraft, modern spacecraft, how can we reach into the universe beyond the atmosphere? We can't. So this has to be the sky that's in view. So it's a
Right. And then
power.
is this the same word that's used when the 12 spies come back and they're saying that the walls of these cities reach into the heavens? We can't climb these walls. They're not saying that it goes all the way to space, but
Right.
that they're up into the sky. They're
Yeah,
huge walls.
it's up into the sky. And it becomes a relative matter as to how far up into the sky. And usually the reason that ancient Hebrew would use that term is it's higher than the average person can reach, right? That's pretty much the idea, to demonstrate that it goes up into the sky beyond the human grasp.
It's really interesting, just to see how this kind of helps us to get a picture. So we're getting an idea of maybe how high the Tower of Babel may have been. Do we see structures like that being built so early in the history of civilization?
Well, what we see in the early civilization is there's a certain model of building, that's a tall building that goes up, that's not your typical structure, right? It's not your residential home. It's not your king's palace. It's not your temple for a god, that kind of thing. But this is something different. This is something um, far from the ordinary, where it's really, and again, we're thinking in terms of the ancient world, not the modern world with skyscrapers, but in the ancient world, it's really going high. And that model is the ziggurat. It's a German word that we use for a certain type of building that has its origins in Mesopotamia, but we see them literally all over the world.
Sure. Yeah, we all always talk about these different pyramid-like structures. Can you explain to us what a ziggurat, maybe what it looked like in that part of the world in Mesopotamia?
Yeah, they could vary some in how they're constructed, but essentially there are multiple sides of it, usually four sides of it, and there are staircases, usually multiple staircases that ascend on the outside to climb to the top. And usually on the top, there is a platform or a flat area where you could either, for example, you could build a little shrine up there. So it would be like a miniature building on top of this building. Or you could have sacrifices there, lots of purposes. But certainly what was going on with virtually all of these ancient ziggurats was some type of what we call cultic activity, which means, it's a fancy way to say, and it has nothing to do with, Mormonism or Jehovah's Witnesses, but it's a worship, it's a worship facility, and there's a worship act going on. So you worship through sacrifice of animals, you worship through song, you worship through chanting, incantations, lots of things in the ancient world that could describe this.
Yeah, and I want to address something right now as you talk about cultic sites at the tops of these towers. One thing that I hear with some frequency, and of course, looking at things historically, I tend to kind of go, "Oh no, what is going on here?" That there is a popular belief today that you get to the top of a ziggurat and there's some sort of a stargate to go into another dimension. So you're telling me this didn't happen?
No, that sounds great, Clayton, and I would love to, rub my hands together and talk with excitement about that kind of thing, but we have no evidence of that kind of thing actually going on with the original ziggurats now.
Yeah, and so that's the great thing about archaeology, is helping us to illuminate the text of Scripture, and we can actually look at things from the perspective of human beings who live on planet Earth, and we see these things go out. We don't have to come up with fantastic explanations for everything. There's a lot of symbolism going on in this Mesopotamian culture and in building these things. And so they've got these cultic sites and these pyramids, these ziggurats are these places where maybe the human meets the divine. That's sort of an idea. Like, I guess that's kind of the idea of a temple. Is that what they're functioning as?
Yeah, they're essentially functioning as a place for high worship, so that the most important cult, worship cult, the most important, and again, we're talking about a place where there's pantheons, right? So there are multiple gods. And it would usually be that if there's a ziggurat there, it's going to be connected with the patron deity. So the local god of that city, whichever city it is, would have usually its own patron deity. So they kind of exalt one god above all the other gods at that city. Not every city had that, but many cities did. So usually if it was a big enough city that would have a ziggurat, it would also have a temple there. And oftentimes we see that main temple of the patron god of, or goddess of that city located in very close proximity to the ziggurat to show that there is indeed a connection. So the king oversees the worship cult of the patron god or goddess there, and he would then connect that worship to activities at the top of this ziggurat. So again, that it's varied as to what he could be doing up there. Usually there would be things like sacrifices or worship activities, worship services that would take place there. So priests would go up for a part of that, and it would be on most likely certain times of the year, New Year's and that kind of thing.
So, do you see any sorts of parallels throughout the history of the ancient world in other places, Egypt or the Far East, or dare I say, even North or South America? Do you see connections then for this sort of structure and its use?
Yeah, what we see, Clayton, is a similarity in architectural design in various places around the world. And we're talking Asia, we're talking North America, we're talking South America, India, lots of places around the world where we have vestiges, ancient vestiges of this very same type of architectural design that was, if you will, superimposed in different locations. And they quickly morphed into their own design. Like in Egypt, we have a transitional stage where the first one, the oldest pyramid that we have there, it's not exactly like what the ziggurats were in Mesopotamia, but it resembles it. It's called the stepped pyramid. It resembles it enough to see that there is a similarity in design and that there was a root design. And then the second oldest pyramid is the bent pyramid. So we go from lots of um, you know, stair step kind of thing to a kind of a two-part angle. So it's divided into two, and then it becomes straight, right? It becomes flat, and you have these sloped flat surfaces that together come to a head at the top, and there's a point there, and on the top there's a pyramidion. But um, this represents kind of if you will, an evolution of the process of the building's architecture to kind of move into its own design. And there it was repurposed, right? In Egypt, it became, instead of a cultic worship place at the top, instead it became a burial tomb.
Mhm.
So you connected a person, and a deceased person at that, with that very building. And so usually in most cases, of course, it's royalty, it's a king or the king's family. And, there would be a burial under the ground underneath this pyramid.
And in the case of, say, a pharaoh, we're looking at someone who is considered to be a deity, a god on earth, correct?
Yes. Yeah, depending on the time in ancient history, let's say this. Eventually, the Egyptian kings came to be deified. First, At the earliest phases, it was always after the death of the king. It was never during his lifetime. And then eventually it kind of, moved ahead. It kind of modernized, and they ended up worshiping kings as gods while they were living, which is kind of an odious thought for us, but that's how it happened over time.
Right. So that stepped pyramid, that's the pyramid of Djoser. Where would you date that?
That would be dated to I believe that's the fourth dynasty. I don't think that's yet the fifth dynasty. I think that's the fourth dynasty.
Okay, so that's pretty early on in Egyptian
Pretty early in
history.
Egypt's history, yes. In the
Okay.
Old Kingdom.
Yeah, no, so that's great. So can we kind of start to look at the biblical story along with the historical context and the region of Sumer? We've got about 5 minutes left in this episode. Can you get into that a little bit and kind of set the
Yeah,
stage for us?
yeah, sure. And for that, I take you to Genesis 11:9, where it says this. It says, therefore, he goes on existing, called its name confusion. And that means the name of the site, the city itself, which, by the way, it would have had its own name, Clayton. God's renaming it something according to deeds that were done there and activity there that caused its name to change. So he changed its name to confusion
Yes,
because
and also,
there,
can I just put a note of clarification in here? You said he who goes on existing. And this is your translation. This is an actual translation of the name of God and not a transliteration, correct?
right, right. Which, as you probably remember, I constantly was telling my Hebrew students, whenever humanly possible, translate rather than transliterate, because you want to communicate the meaning, not the sounds of the words in another language. So yeah, he goes on existing. That's what it means. And it calls into mind for the hearer that God's eternality is connected to the name that he gave to Moses at the burning bush.
Yeah, so that's important to
Yeah.
understand things from the point of view of the original audience, the original reader of the text. So where is this in Mesopotamia? What's Sumer?
Yeah. So Shumer, it would be southern Mesopotamia, and that's where we're convinced that civilization began, as we know it, right? Urbanized civilization began there. So that's the location. And so that this city that God named or renamed as Confusion would have been located there somewhere in Shumer, which is similar to the Hebrew word Shinar. So that would be those would be cognates from language to language, and it's the same thing. And then the text goes on to say, Clayton, in verse 9 of Genesis 11, because there he goes on existing, confused the language of the entire earth. And from there, he goes on existing, scattered them over the surface of the entire. And you can translate this land or earth, both are possible. It's almost a debatable issue, but he scattered them over the surface of the earth. And I think, Clayton, this is where we have the first means of being able to locate um, historically where this site would be that these events took place. In other words, for me as an exegete, right, because I'm interdisciplinary, I'm a Bible teacher, I teach the Bible in ancient languages. I can't get there as an exegete of the Bible to find out where that place is, simply looking for the city first. I
Sure.
had to take off that hat and put on the hat of an archaeologist, which is, of course, the major of my PhD, and look at it from the perspective of how can we find that outward movement of people from Mesopotamia that would connect us with this event where God did this action that caused the people to be scattered over the surface of the entire land or earth, right? So,
Right.
with that, the answer is there are two outward expansions or physical movements of people, not trade, but moving out from southern Mesopotamia to other places.
So what we have then is in the scriptures, we have a setting that tells us the plain of Shinar. We have a direction that these people are moving, and that they built a city, and that they built a tower, and they used certain materials, And so you have looked in the archaeological record and you've got it down to just a couple of candidates. So next week, we are going to find out more about your candidate for the Tower of Babel. Dr. Petrovich, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Clayton. It was great to be with you and your listeners and viewers.
Thank you.